when charismatic renewal started, Thomas Nelson was doing glued spine.
All right.
Because people would buy a Bible, put it on the shelf, and it would be there for the next 30 years. But when charismatic renewal broke out, people were buying Bibles and they were bringing them back because they were saying this only lasted 3 weeks.
All right.
And the pages were coming
They were
out of it.
sneaking through it.
Well, they were kind of, it was falling on the floor and they were getting slain in the spirit and the Bible was going through the air and they were bending it back and they were kind of reading it like this, and they were reversing cars over them. So they had to revert to the more expensive process of stitching.
Well, here's something interesting Jesus said. He said, most assuredly. Now, as soon as he says that, I think that means wake up, lads, have a listen. Most assuredly, I say to you, he who believes in me has everlasting life. I am the bread of life, and your fathers ate the manna in the wilderness and are dead. A fat lot of good that did them, eh? Well, no, it did sustain them on their journey at the time. But there's a reminder here that they didn't get the eternal life. And they're dead. This is the bread which comes down from heaven, that one may eat of it and not die. I am the living bread which comes down from heaven. If anyone eats of this bread, he'll live forever. And the bread that I shall give is my flesh, which I shall give for the life of the world. Wow. A lot of talking about bread there. Now, my wife bakes the bread, so I feel like I'm a kind of an expert in bread and the whole process and how it comes together and how good it is. But Jesus here is talking about himself, his flesh being the bread. So how do you see that, Chris, in terms of, I know in a lot of traditional churches, they take that in a very literal way. But
it's a thing that Jesus has to get across, but he's talking to people who know their scriptures, and he uses this reference to manna, and I believe the word manna means what is it. So nobody has actually given us a satisfactory explanation, but except in the Psalms, man did eat angels' food. Imagine that. Wow. Man did eat angels' food. So there's a new one for you. Now, this reference to manna, I just have to go back to the Old Testament, because this is what Jesus is building on with these people, because they said, our fathers ate this manna in the desert, and as Anto has just said, and are dead. But Jesus is talking and using this picture of manna, and I turn back to Deuteronomy, and I find very, very important. He says, you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you and to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you and allowed you to hunger and fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know or learn that a man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So he's contrasting the manna with the word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord, that you should learn. I said, if it takes you 40 years to learn, well then be very grateful, because that's how long it took them. And he says, this 40 years, he says, I led you through that desert 40 years to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or no. And he says, I fed you with manna, which you did not know. And then he says this, that you might learn. Now, what was it about this contrast between the manna and this bread that comes down from heaven? He says that you might learn that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. I need to learn more about this proceeding, what we call the proceeding word, a word, a current utterance, something that's up to date. God is needing this up-to-dateness about the word that he's speaking into our hearts. And I believe that this is what we're going to discover in this chapter, John 6.
And in John chapter 6, it was very obvious to the Jews that Jesus was talking to, what he was referring to. In fact, what they began the discussion with was speaking about the manna that came down from heaven, came down on a daily basis, kept the children of Israel alive in the desert for 40 years,
right.
Every single day. And it really just resonates in me, this thing about the manna, the bread that comes down from heaven. I kind of contrast that with something that I picked up there a couple of weeks ago, concerning a senior Irish church official who was kind of lamenting and saying that, the faith has passed away in Ireland.
Right. Wasn't Chris,
And
no?
No, I don't hear Chris talking in those terms, But that is one aspect that we're very familiar with, the idea of man exercising his faith or his religion, I suppose, to reach God. And contrast that with the concept that God gives us in the Word of what comes down from heaven.
The other way around.
The other way round. That, and so our hope is not in what we can do to reach God. Our hope is in what God has done to reach us. And we see that in the Gospel of John right at the beginning, because it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then it says a lot of stuff, and then in verse 14 it comes down to, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. And this is the staggering thing about God's relationship with humanity.
Yeah.
He came to us. He came to us in the person of Jesus. He came to us. And so all our striving to reach heaven by keeping rules and regulations and good, as we tend to do all the time, that's all kind of a bit redundant, and it's beside the point, I guess, beside the point, because it's not that we can reach heaven by God, or reach God by our efforts. It's that God has come down to us and introduced himself. And what was he like? So we see Jesus going around healing the sick, raising the dead,
That's right.
healing.
Yeah.
This is what
Captives
God
free.
is like. And in some ways, I mean, there may be many people in Ireland who get to click on this little podcast and are wondering, was this church official right? Is Christianity over in Ireland? And I would say, actually, maybe it's just having a rebirth.
Well,
Where we are more attentive to God coming down to earth than us reaching for the sky.
Or you could use a different word, Dave, instead of rebirth, reboot. The way, do you ever have a computer? I find my computer on a Friday afternoon gets really tired and does silly things and doesn't work and all the rest. And it's like me, it's just tired after the week. And it needs a refresh, a restart, And out of that, it works perfectly then when it gets rebooted, And it's a good point, Dave, about rebirth of Christianity or biblical true Christianity in this nation.
Well, when
And
it's
maybe with the crisis of all the pandemic and the madness of all that, that it maybe will happen,
Well, when it's Jesus who's coming down through the Holy Spirit, as he promised these guys, I'm the bread that comes down from heaven. If any man eat of this bread, that what that says to me is, in fact, going forward, there is tremendous hope, because it is Jesus who comes down from heaven through the Holy Spirit and introduces himself to us, if we are just willing to come and acknowledge that he is the Lord and our Saviour.
Yeah.
I think what really what offended them as you go on in the chapter, right? I think what really offended, why so many of them walked away, disciples walked away, was that basically he was saying, it's got to be me or you have no life. I am the only one who has life. And unless you eat of me, you will have no life in you.
Interesting that.
And so what he was saying, what he was talking about here was the cross of Jesus Christ, his death, his burial, his resurrection. And us having to accept that cross in our lives. So many of us, we'd like Jesus as an addition to what we already have. And a lot of people, they love talking about God, they love talking about Jesus, but they do not like talking about the cross. The cross is an offense to them because it means that they have to die. They have to die to self. And that's where the rubber hits the road. If you want to have this life in you, you must accept the death and burial and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
But that's such a joyful thing.
It is.
Because, it's not that, oh man, I got to die.
No.
But it's, wow, you mean there's something better than what I've got?
Sure. But you do have to let go.
Yes.
You have to let go of the self life.
But it's kind of, where you come to the point where you look at your self-life and you think, oh my God, I wish there was something better than this. Well, hey, guess what? There is. So it's not, oh, I've got to let it go and maybe God will, come and help me. No, I get to let go.
Sure.
Wow. Because there's new life for me.
Yeah.
Sure.
But John, you talk about that being offensive, and I think that's really interesting because the scripture in John 6:66, I always remember that 666. Everyone talks about the beast and Revelation and everything, but there's another one, John 6:66, which says this. It says, "From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked with him no more." So that makes your eyebrows raise and say, well, what just happened here? So you go back a few verses earlier and Jesus was talking to them. He said this. He said, "This is the bread which came down from heaven, not as your fathers ate the manna and are dead. He who eats this bread will live forever." These things he said in the synagogue as he taught in Capernaum. Therefore many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is an easy saying." No. He said, "This is a hard saying. Who can understand it?" That's interesting,
Because what he was really saying was, there's no life in you if it doesn't come from me.
Yeah.
Right? It has to come from me, this resurrection.
And that was in the context of people who were really, trying very hard, to be good and to keep the rules and to keep the commandments.
Yeah.
And that, the contrast between what they were doing and what Jesus was putting before them was so contrast, so different that actually they couldn't accept what he was saying. And they had to walk away. That's the difference between religion and faith.
Just hold that thought, right? Now, is there something interesting with that thought in mind? And you look at the Lord's Prayer and you see, give us day by day our daily bread, or give us this day our daily bread. It could say it's a double meaning that. I do believe it's praying for God, for provision, that it comes from God. If there's physical bread on your table, it's a gift from heaven, But I think there's more to it, isn't there?
Absolutely. I believe that so passionately that I'd almost say that you're calling it by the wrong name. Some people call it, they say, well, it's the Lord's Prayer. And they're saying, well, it's not really the Lord's Prayer, it's the disciples' prayer.
Yes. Right.
Because Jesus couldn't have prayed that prayer, but I believe he did. I believe it was his prayer, because he's talking about kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
And he's saying there that he needs this bread, right? He says that let's get it straight. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on the earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Now, I believe that is actually what we're talking about here, his life, right? And I just have this last little bit to add with this John 6 passage. Therefore, many of his disciples, when they heard this, said, "This is a hard saying. Who can understand it?" When Jesus knew in himself that his disciples complained about this, he said to them, "Does this offend you? What then, if you should see the Son of Man ascend to where he was before? It is the Spirit who gives life. The flesh profits nothing. The words that I speak to you are spirit, and they are life." Now that is our food. And this, back into what we call the Lord's Prayer, where he says, well, if you're going to see kingdom of heaven coming in your life, and his will being done on the earth, then you're going to need this bread of heaven. Wow. Just as I need it. He says, as I live, Sarah, as I live because of the Father, so he who eats this bread will live because of me. There in John 6. And I love that. I love that. Most assuredly I say to you, my flesh is food indeed, my blood is drink indeed. And then he adds, as the living Father sent me, and I live because of the Father, so he who feeds on me will live because of me. So this bread of heaven is very, very much the key.
And the interesting thing I see is, give us this day our daily bread. It's a kind of like, take it in the physical first of all. Bread, it nourishes you, feeds you, and your body works and you stay alive, okay? But you know what? You need it the next day.
Yes.
And you need it continually, do you see? And in a similar way, we need God continually in our lives. Like you were saying, John, Johnny, your friend who said 3.5 years, God spoke to me. Well, imagine if you're trying to have a relationship with your wife or with your friend and you say, well, 3.5 years ago they spoke to me, not good for a relationship. But, God is, it's this continual feeding from God. And we see that also, I believe, in the Acts of the Apostles. In chapter 2, they were filled with the Holy Spirit, right? And then in Acts chapter 4, the place was shaken and they were filled with the Holy Spirit. You say, hang on a minute, I thought they were filled in chapter 2. No. Well, they were, but they leak or something happens and they need filling up again.
So I'm just thinking now, that there may be somebody out there who is saying, you mean that it's possible for me to have this bread of heaven? It's possible for me to have this life? So can somebody explain, please, how you actually get this?
How you get the life?
Where does this come from? How do you if God is pouring this out of heaven, how do you actually get some? Because I'm sure there are people who really want to know.
Well, I'll tell you this. If John Wayne, the famous cowboy, if he was an evangelist, he would have said it like this. He would say, get down off your horse and eat your beans. It's this idea, get off your high horse of pride, because that's the one stumbling block, the major stumbling block, I believe. And people use the word in modern parlance in a very positive way, pride, but hang on a minute. Pride is a barrier to God. It's as simple as that. And, I think if you humble yourself before your Creator who did the work.
Okay, so that's one thing. Humble yourself.
The question.
Anything else?
And well, taking time every day is a must. There are 100 things every day that try to distract you. Very important things of running a living, running a household, having family and all this kind of stuff, very important stuff.
Yeah.
But stopping all that important stuff to take time in word and prayer every day, very simply. Sometimes I've got to nearly grit my teeth because I don't feel like it. I don't feel very spiritual, right? The enemy throws all kinds of things into my head, this, that and the other, and I say, stop. I'm going to take time in word and prayer no matter what. And it's not an emotion. Sometimes I feel fantastic. Sometimes I can really feel manifest presence of God in the room and it's lovely. Other times I feel nothing. But I know that he is true, and I know that he is faithful, and I know that he is constantly there, feeding my spirit with that bread every day.
Yeah, but come back to, that's right, Johnny, 100%. But coming back to Dave's question, I believe there's one ingredient that is critical, and it's a 5-letter word beginning with B. It's blood. Because, without the blood of Jesus, we are all lost. We have no hope. We cannot achieve it. We cannot go anywhere.
No.
And as a street evangelist on the street, I often say to people, I say, what's the one thing without which there's no forgiveness? And I said, it's a 5-letter word and begins with B. And it's unbelievable what happens on the street. People are so blinded to the truth. I sometimes have to give them 4 letters of the 5-letter word, and they still can't get it.
But explain that. Explain that. What does that mean?
Blood is
to
the death, the life. Life is in the blood, right? Okay, and the life of Jesus Christ was in his blood, but his blood was different to our blood. His blood was innocent. Ours is guilty. And when that blood sacrifice, and there's plenty of blood sacrifice in the Old Testament, prepping us for this, and that his sacrifice was adequate to satisfy the justice of holy God. Now, look, it's tough enough if you want to share a flat with a guy and he's a perfectionist, okay? And you go in there with your sloppy habits and you think you're going to live with this guy. That's going to be a rough one because everything's neat and tidy and perfect, okay? But just multiply that by 1,000 and think you're going to live with holy God. You haven't a hope. We really don't. All he has to do is look up the history of your internet search and you're dead, So here's the thing is, we cannot do it. He did it, and he offers it.
Yep.
So, and that's why I say blood, because without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I recall in the Old Testament that the way God had set it up was that they could take an animal and sacrifice it, put it to death, and shed its blood.
That's right.
So that would cover over their sins. That would pay to cover over.
It was kind of a holding pattern, I think, Dave. A
holding pattern. Okay. So then Jesus comes along, and he is the bread of heaven. He is God. Why did he end up on the cross?
Well, I think we look at his first cousin, the hairy fella in the wilderness with the strange food, John the Baptist, right? And they were coming to him for baptism of repentance. And he spotted Jesus in the distance. He said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world."
Now, that's a phrase that we're very familiar with. So, many of us...
Okay, we'll break it down then. Lambs are innocent. Do you ever see a lamb? I grew up in the Curragh in Kildare. We'd see the spring lambs. They're so cute. They're so innocent. They're such fun, bouncing around. The thought that they're guilty. Well, they're not. They're innocent lambs. They're a picture of innocence. And Jesus Christ, and then the pattern in the Old Testament was there was a lamb had to be brought. And here's the bit I really love, is you could be a scraggly old guy with bad habits and all sorts of problems in your own life. And when you brought that lamb to the priest was, God commanded the priest to examine not you, but the lamb. Well, he knew you were lost. But the lamb had to be a perfect one, not a scabby old cheap thing, and there was all sorts of defects listed and couldn't be this way or that way. So the lamb had to be perfect and a perfect sacrifice. All forerunner for Jesus Christ on the cross, So.
Well, I mean, that's amazing because it's like that in the Old Testament when a guy brought his lamb to the priest, it was sacrificed and that covered him. But John the Baptist says, this is the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.
Yeah.
This is what everything else was just a faint shadow of. This is the real deal. And that so for everybody who was alive in that day, down to today and beyond, that this is the sacrifice. The cross of Jesus, his shed blood, is the sacrifice.
I know, it's an absolute paradigm shift, because imagine if you were a religious Jew in the day, and maybe you were God-fearing and you did everything that the Torah commanded, right? You'd be buying animals all the time. and getting them sacrificed every year, all these things, it'd be a major burden for you, and be very careful all the time with all your bits and pieces. The idea that one man of one time could actually pay the bill,
Yeah.
it
so-
flips it,
And so that means you. That means you.
Yeah.
So, going back to people saying, oh, the faith has passed away in Ireland. But for you, there is hope.
Yeah.
Because that sacrifice of his blood on the cross of Calvary 2,000 years ago comes down to this very day, comes down right in your face. And that if you want that gift from God, not looking at you to see how worthy you are, but looking at him to see how worthy he is. Perfect.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice can be put to your account right this very moment if you simply receive it.
Yeah.
Accept that he is the Lord, that he's the boss, and that he's made this provision for you as a gift. You just receive it.
Yeah.
Yeah. When Jesus goes through temptation in the desert, he's quoting this famous verse, "Man does not live by bread alone." Now, that verse is, we've already looked at it in Deuteronomy 8, and he's contrasting the manna with this bread that he says, where he says, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." We've made an important point out of that, this proceeding, up-to-date, now word. And he's saying this because, in Deuteronomy, because he has this problem with these people. And it always baffled me. Why a bunch of slaves, 4 times, maybe 5 times in one chapter, Deuteronomy 8, he has to talk about humbling them. I say, but what have they got to be proud about? Right, they're a bunch of ex-slaves. and yet he says, but our famous verse there, Deuteronomy 8, and he says, he led you through that desert to test you, to see what was in your heart. Let me read it for you. "And you shall remember that the Lord your God led you all the way, these 40 years, in the wilderness, to humble you, to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. So he humbled you, and he allowed you to hunger, fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know, or might let you learn, that man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." And it's this proceeding word. And Jesus in his temptation in the desert quotes this verse and silences the enemy when he turns and says, "Turn these stones, if you are the Son of God. Command these stones to be made bread." And I realize that there's something more serious even than pride. Now, pride is very much involved in it, but it's this self-dependence. Because any area where there's self-dependence, it means the enemy has a foothold in your life. That's what happened in the Garden of Eden.
Wow.
Man shall, he says, you can be as God, knowing good from evil, right? You won't need to depend on God. You can have all of this. This role of rulership, sovereignty, dominion over the earth is all yours. And you can handle it yourself. So it's this self-dependence. We call it being your own person in our own language, right? Being your own person. Don't have to depend on anybody. And least of all on God. And God has to say, "I'm sorry, I don't deal with that." And so the force of that temptation in that desert is, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones into bread. And Jesus answers and says, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God." And those temptations are designed, and they will be with you as they were with him, to try to get you to move away from this life of dependence to a life of independence that says, I can be my own person, I can go my own way, I can do my own thing, I can be as God. And we've never known so many people who can pretend to be a god. This Guru Maharaji, whatever you like to call him, is landing at Heathrow Airport some years ago.
Yogi, the Beatles man.
Mm-hmm. And something like that. And a lot of very kind of very difficult, we call them newsmen, right, are going to give him a hard time. And they said, is it right that you worship little tin gods back in your country? And our Indian guru is well able for these pressmen. And he said, oh, no. He says, since we discovered that we ourselves are gods, we don't need to worship little tin gods. And I don't think he's the only one.
Yeah, I know.
We're good at playing God, at least until we hit the really rough patch.
That's right.
And that's what has to come. That's what we've been talking about.
Well, you're saying, Chris, it was 40 years in the wilderness, and the purpose was to learn that lesson.
Yep.
You know, man does not live by bread alone. And I just trying to visualize this. I was just looking at the back of my Bible there, and the map between Egypt, and it looks ballpark about 200 miles, the distance, right?
Yep.
So you imagine a bunch of about 1 million people, or how many were there?
600,000 men.
600,000 men. Well, women and children too. So I think you're ballpark kicking around 2 million.
Yeah.
Ballpark. Okay, 2 million people leave Cork City, right? And they're heading up about 200 miles north. So that brings them to Dundalk or somewhere, okay? And it takes them 40 years. Think about it that way, you know.
That's a lot.
Our understanding of that is that they were going round in circles.
Well, obviously they didn't have Google Maps.
Well, I did that journey on a coach in about 6 hours.
Yeah.
On a coach.
Yeah. There you go.
From Egypt to Israel in about 5.5 hours. You know, but it's amazing that Jesus sets us this amazing example that he depended on the Father every step of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And that wilderness temptation, and even right up to the Garden of Gethsemane, one thing the enemy tried to do was to get him to step out of the will of his Father, to be independent of the will of the Father. And he never did. He says, all I do is the will of the Father. The words I speak are not my words, they're my Father's words. The miracles I do, they're not mine, they're my Father's. Every step,
Judgments I make,
every step of the way, he checked back in with the Father.
Yep.
He didn't even say, well, I've had this success this time, I can do it again the next time without consulting the Father. No, every step of the way. So if Jesus has done this as our example, you know, this is our safeguard, that we come to the Father.
Yep.
We come to the Father every morning. We come to the Father, to the Abba Father, and he gives us our direction for that day. He gives us our strength for that day. He gives us our guidance. Everything comes from the Father, and it just means that we're safe.
Yep.
We're safe.
And this kind of really ties in with what Chris was saying and what you were saying at the beginning, you know, that this word that proceeds from the Father, man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the Father. And it's just so wonderful to think of the words that Jesus said before he departed this earth. He said, I will not leave you orphans. He said, I will come to you, to you. And that's the word that proceeds from the Father.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the
So
daily.
good.
That's the daily word that he. You know, we have so many people who are trying to figure out how to reach God, but actually, he comes to you.
He reaches you.
He reaches you.
Yeah.
And so what Johnny was saying there right at the beginning about every day, you know, because the bread of heaven is available to us every day. But, you know, all we have to do is just go and get it. Like the children of Israel had to do in the wilderness.
Yeah.
They had to go outside the camp and pick up the stuff.
Yeah.
But it was there, whether they picked it up or
But even
not.
Jesus, David, even Jesus, this is always a favourite of mine, Isaiah 50, morning by morning, he wakens my ear to hear as one that's taught, so that I may know how to speak. a word in season to him that's weary. Imagine that, morning by morning, so that I may know how to speak. So, right word, right time, right person. If even Jesus needed that. And we know it's talking about Jesus because the text goes on. He says, I gave my back to those who smote me. He says, I didn't hide my face from shame and spitting. And they plucked out the beard and so on. So 150 years before it happened, longer than that, nearly 400 years earlier, Isaiah is telling in detail the secret of Jesus' life. Morning by morning, he wakens me.
I love that, Chris, because he wakens my ear. You know, where there's so much noise out there. There's so many voices out there. In fact, if I was to kind of draw this block of space here, there's probably about 500 TV and radio channels passing through that space. If I had the right receiver, I could pick them all up, okay? Now, here's the thing is, there's many time it's the enemy's voice. And go right back, everything's in Genesis. Chapter 3, at the beginning, it says, now the serpent was more cunning than any beast. Cunning. He was more deceptive and twisting truth. And even half the things he said to Eve when he was tempting her, half of them were true. But he twisted the truth. And in fact, Jesus in the wilderness, he spoke the word of God to him. You know, so the enemy uses truth and mixes it in with his cunningness to twist people away. And but just to be able to, first thing in the morning, you wake up and you're lying in the bed and the pet's still on the pillow, you know, you can believe that word in Isaiah 50, you know, and let the Lord speak to you straight away. You know, I think that's powerful.
So it's like, you know, this is what defines normal Christianity. You know, so what is normal Christianity? Well, you say, well, first of all, I have nothing that recommends me to anybody, least of all to God. Normal Christianity says, I am absolutely dependent for life itself on God. That if it wasn't for the blood of Jesus, I would be lost. This is normal Christianity.
Without hope.
Without hope. That I need this word that proceeds from heaven, from God, every day in order to be able to make it to date. This is normal Christianity. So, and I can only get this on the basis that he offers it to me free as a gift. This is normal Christianity. I have to receive it. And if I receive it, I am welcomed into the family of God. And I will know him through the Holy Spirit for the rest of my life. This is normal Christianity. And, you know, like I don't know if there is somebody out there who has never really heard what normal Christianity is, now is the moment. There's nothing more that you can do now apart from receiving the gift that God has prepared for you before you were even born.
Wow.
Very good.
Gosh, Dave, you're beginning to sound like an evangelist or something. But it's the truth, you know, and the truth will set you free.
Very good.
Boy, we need that today, don't we? A bit of freedom, eh?
We do. Oh, my goodness.
Yes. Thank you, Lord.